A fisherman disappears at sea, swallowed whole by the corpse of a drifting whale. That opening line sounds like the beginning of a tall tale, the sort of exaggerated yarn told in dimly lit bars or half-forgotten coastal villages. Yet, in the spring of 1953, off the northern coast of Japan, such a thing was reported to have happened. A sailor vanished during a storm, was presumed dead, and returned 9 days later with a story so disturbing that it left even the most hardened whalers shaken. He claimed he had survived inside the decomposing carcass of a whale. For nearly a decade, the story circulated quietly among fishing crews before gradually fading into obscurity. But those who heard it firsthand said it was no legend at all. It was a true account of survival against biology, the elements, and the crushing loneliness of the open sea. Japan's northern waters have always held a reputation for cruelty. The currents near Hokkaido are sharp and unpredictable. The winds cut across the sea with a force that can strip warmth from a man's bones in minutes. Fishermen raised in these regions learned very early to treat the sea as an entity unto itself, ancient, indifferent, and far more powerful than any human hand. It is not a matter of conquering the sea, but existing within its moods, surviving its tempers and hoping, always hoping, that it shows mercy. These were the waters in which the story of Hachiro Tanaka unfolded. To understand how a man could vanish into a dead whale and survive, how he could endure 9 days inside a rotting carcass drifting across the Pacific, we must first understand the world into which he was born and the dangers that shaped the men who made their living on the northern seas. Hachiro had come from a family of fishermen spanning generations. His father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had all lived and died by the tides. They worked not as whalers, but as coastal netcasters, harvesting sardines, mackerel, and squid near the rocky shores of Hakodate. As a boy, Hachiro learned to read the water before he could read letters. He memorized the high and low tide patterns by age 7. By 9, he could handle a skiff in mild wind. By 13, he could tie every knot in his father's repertoire without instruction. But the war changed everything. The devastation of 1945 left Japan in what many survivors described as a state beyond poverty. Cities had been flattened, food supplies were scarce, the black market thrived while coastal communities starved. It was during this era that whaling, already a long-standing tradition in Japan, grew into something resembling an industry. Whale meat became a crucial protein source. Entire school lunches relied upon it. The government encouraged young men to join whaling fleets, offering stable pay and warm meals at a time when many families had neither. This was how Hachiro found himself aboard the Daigo Shinsei Maru, a 47-meter whaling vessel that patrolled the waters off Hokkaido each spring. The ship was old, patched repeatedly after decades of use, but it carried with it a sense of purpose born from necessity. The men who crewed it were not adventurers, nor were they romantics seeking glory in the open sea. They were laborers, tough, pragmatic, and intimately aware of their own fragility. Life aboard the Shinsei Maru followed a strict rhythm. At dawn, the men rose to the shrill cry of a whistle. They ate quickly: rice, miso soup, sometimes dried fish if supplies permitted. Then they took their positions. Some manned the lookout stations. Others prepared the harpoon launchers, cleaned the decks, or repaired minor damage to nets and ropes. By late morning, the ship would reach the deeper channels where whales often surfaced. The rest of the day was spent searching, waiting, and listening. Whaling was a mixture of monotony and sudden violence. Hours could pass without a single sighting. Then, without warning, a plume of vapor would burst skyward, a giant exhaling, and the ship erupted into frantic motion. Men scrambled to positions, commands were shouted, engines roared. The chase began. But in the spring of 1953, the whales had been elusive. Migratory patterns seemed disrupted, and several ships reported unusually low catches. Crewmen aboard the Shinsei Maru whispered superstitions into the wind. The whales had moved south. The currents had shifted. The gods of the sea were displeased. Although the captain dismissed such talk, even he could not ignore the worrying lack of sightings. By the end of April, the men were hungry, frustrated, and exhausted. Supplies had grown thin. The crew had been living on rationed rice and pickled vegetables for a week. Tempers flared over trivial issues. A loud sneeze could provoke a fistfight. Several men believed the captain would order a return to port soon, empty-handed and ashamed. Everything changed on the morning of April 27th. The weather was unnervingly calm, so much so that the deckhands spoke in hushed voices, as though afraid to disturb something sleeping just beneath the surface. At around 11:20 a.m., the lookout stationed on the crow nest shouted that he had spotted a shape in the water, several hundred meters west of their current heading. The crew surged to the railings. Through binoculars, they saw what appeared to be a massive whale floating belly up, its pale underside reflecting the weak sunlight. It was perfectly still, drifting in a wide, lazy circle. A dead whale was not as valuable as a fresh kill, but it was still salvageable, especially for a ship running out of time and food. The captain ordered the engines reduced to low speed. Men gathered ropes and prepared bowhooks. The air grew heavy with tension, for approaching a dead whale was a gamble. Decomposition generates gases that swell a whale's body like an enormous balloon. One wrong poke, one wrong incision, and the whale can erupt with catastrophic force. Even seasoned whalers step lightly around such corpses. As the Shinsei Maru drew closer, the full size of the carcass became apparent. It was a fin whale, nearly 20 meters long, perhaps weighing upwards of 40 tons. Its skin was mottled, bubbling in places where decomposition had begun tearing through connective tissue. A faint haze of steam rose from its surface, carrying the unmistakable stench of rot. The captain gave strict instructions. Approach from the side, avoid the midsection, and do not pierce the skin unless absolutely necessary. The men nodded, their faces set in grim determination. Whatever concerns they had were overridden by the promise of food, profits, and the relief of ending weeks of frustration. Focused among the crew preparing to inspect the whale was Hachiro Tanaka. He stood at the starboard railing with two others, gripping a bowhook as he leaned out over the water. His job was simple in theory: to test the stability of the whale, determine whether it could be towed, and look for signs of rupture. The whale drifted closer, carried by a gentle current. From above, its pale stomach looked eerily smooth, bulging outward with internal pressure. The men prodded it lightly with their poles. The surface yielded slightly under their touch, but not enough to indicate imminent collapse. To the untrained eye, the whale looked stable. But decomposition is unpredictable, and even the most minor shift in internal gases can trigger collapse or explosion. Something subtle changed in the water, a vibration, a faint tremor that ran up the hull and into the soles of the men's boots. Several deckhands paused, exchanging uncertain glances. Then the sea heaved. It was not a large swell by the standards of the Northern Pacific, just a rolling surge that lifted the ship half a meter. But it was enough. The whale, buoyed by the swell, rose and slammed against the side of the Shinsei Maru with a wet, sickening thud. The impact rippled through the deck. Hachiro lost his footing instantly. His bowhook slipped from his hand, skittering across the wood. He reached for the railing, fingers grazing the metal for the briefest moment, but he could not hold on. His weight carried him forward. He toppled over the edge and vanished with barely a splash. Shouts rang across the deck. Two men lunged toward the rail. Instinctively, he tried to stand, but the chamber was only tall enough for him to kneel in. The walls pressed inward, wet and yielding. A pool of warm fluid collected beneath him, soaking his legs. In blind terror, he scrambled up the sloping membrane, his hands slipping repeatedly. Then he noticed something. A faint glow above him. Not bright, not even enough to illuminate details, but a hazy suggestion of light filtered through layers of blubber and skin. That thin veil of brightness anchored his sanity. He climbed toward it, his body trembling with fear and exhaustion. He found the highest point in the chamber, where the tissue was thinnest and the air, while foul, moved enough to provide minimal oxygen. Here, condensation collected in droplets. He cupped his hands beneath it. Warm, sour, but drinkable. Hours passed. Then the hours became a day. His heartbeat echoed inside the chamber like a drum. He listened to the shifting whale body around him, to the groaning of membranes under pressure, to the distant, muffled roar of waves beyond layers of flesh. He was alone in a tomb of meat, and the whale was drifting. By the second day, hallucinations crept in. He saw shadows on the membrane, shadows that flickered like movement, though nothing moved within the chamber but himself. He whispered to the darkness, repeating prayers he had not said since childhood, reciting the names of his family to stay grounded. At one point, he pressed his ear to the membrane and thought he heard something outside, a distant thrum, rhythmic and familiar. Engines, boats, possibly close, possibly within shouting distance. He screamed until his throat cracked, but the whale's layers muffled his cries. Tears stung his eyes, whether they came from grief, exhaustion, or the gases that burned every soft membrane in his body, he could not tell. On the third day, he began to understand the whale's condition through sensation alone. Certain chambers tightened, others softened. Gas bubbles shifted around him like thunderous heartbeats. The whale was ballooning, and at any moment, if pressure peaked, it might rupture, tearing open with enough force to kill him instantly. Yet, he also felt something else. The whale was moving differently, no longer drifting aimlessly. The water felt warmer, more turbulent. The sounds changed. He felt vibrations running through the carcass, vibrations caused by shallower waters and shifting tides. He was approaching land. By the fourth day, he managed to push himself into a narrower passage leading upward. The chamber opened into a slightly larger cavity near the whale's throat. Here, more light seeped through the membranes, creating a patchwork of muted silhouettes. The visibility gave him renewed hope, but it also revealed something terrifying. The tissue around him was deteriorating rapidly. Slabs of muscle sagged like melting wax. Fluids pooled and sloshed as the whale rolled. He knew this chamber would not hold much longer. Either it would collapse, crushing him, or gases would escape suddenly, suffocating him. He had to reach the surface, had to tear through the membrane before it was too late. With trembling fingers, he probed the walls for weaknesses. Certain sections sagged more easily, indicating thinning flesh. He dug his nails into one such area and pulled. The membrane resisted. He pulled again, harder. It stretched slowly, reluctantly.
But before he could widen the gap further, the entire whale shuddered violently. The carcass jolted to one side. Ichiro lost his grip and fell backward into darkness, striking his head against a slab of cartilage. The last thing he remembered was the sound of water rushing through a newly formed crack in the chamber. Then, everything went black. The whale was sinking, and the man inside it was slipping once again into unconsciousness. Ichiro Tanaka did not know how long he remained unconscious. Time inside the rotting whale had long since ceased to function in any recognizable sense. There was no sun, no shadow, no horizon. Only the thick, humid darkness, pulsing with the slow collapse of a dying giant drifting across the sea. For a while, there was nothing at all, not even dreams, just the sensation of weightlessness, as though his mind had been untethered from his body. Sounds drifted through the void, distant, watery murmurs that echoed in his skull like memories of a world he no longer belonged to. When awareness returned, it did so violently. His lungs seized, his chest tightened. He woke coughing, choking on foul, rancid air that sculled in his throat. His eyes stung with acidic fumes. Panic flared. He clawed at the darkness, reaching for anything solid. His hands met wet, sagging flesh pushing against him from all sides. The whale had shifted again. The chamber he had climbed into, his only refuge, was half flooded. The warm, viscous fluids inside the whale sloshed against his waist, thick as syrup, filling the air with nauseating fumes. Every breath burned. The membrane overhead sagged dangerously low, brushing the top of his head like a ceiling ready to collapse. And beneath him, through the slick fluid, he felt motion. A downward pull, a steady, ominous sinking. The whale was beginning to descend. Whether from gas release, structural collapse, or a change in buoyancy, the carcass was no longer drifting at the surface. It was being dragged slowly downward, as though the sea had finally decided to claim it. And if the whale sank completely, it would carry him with it, into darkness so deep and cold that even the decomposing body would eventually implode under pressure. Ichiro forced himself upright, his head spinning. The air felt thinner than before. Breathing too deeply made him lightheaded. He pressed a hand against his chest, trying to steady his pulse. The walls vibrated with each shift of the whale's massive body. Fluids trickled down the membranes like sweat. A low groan rumbled through the chamber, as though the whale were exhaling its final breath. He thought he could remember how he had climbed into this chamber before losing consciousness. There had been a narrow passage, a sloping tunnel of soft tissue connecting two internal cavities. If he could find it again, perhaps he could reach a higher chamber, or maybe even the surface. But the whale's collapse had distorted everything. He pressed his palms against the sagging membrane above him. It felt thinner than before, almost stretchy. His fingers sank into it, leaving indentations that slowly refilled with warm fluid. If he applied enough pressure, he might be able to tear through. But would tearing the membrane help him escape, or would it flood the chamber further? The outside water was unpredictable. The whale's body might be partially submerged, or it might be sinking deeper with each passing moment. He needed more information. He leaned toward the thinnest part of the membrane and pressed his ear against it, straining to listen. At first, there was only the steady beat of his own heart, amplified by the tight enclosure. Then, something else. A faint, rhythmic thumping. Not the motion of the whale. Not the groaning of membranes. Something external. Something against the whale's outer body. It took him nearly a minute to understand what he was hearing. Waves. Relief washed over him, a wave so sudden and overwhelming that tears stung his eyes. He wasn't in the abyss yet. He still had a chance. But the reprieve was short-lived. A sudden shift in the whale's body jerked him sideways. The membrane under his feet tilted. He slid into the deeper part of the chamber, the warm sledge pulling him down as though eager to swallow him. He grabbed for anything he could. His fingers found a thick, rubbery fold of tissue, perhaps the remnants of a collapsed air sac. He hauled himself upward, muscles trembling from exhaustion. His breathing was becoming labored. Each inhale brought a wave of dizziness, as though his lungs struggled to extract enough oxygen from the foul air. He couldn't remain in this chamber longer. The gases were intensifying. The sinking was speeding up, and the whale's internal temperature fluctuated unpredictably, creating pockets of heat that made the air feel suffocating. He had to move. He pressed forward through the chamber, feeling along the sagging walls. The passage he had used before, a narrow slit between two membranes, might still be open. It would lead him to a higher cavity where he had briefly glimpsed filtered light.
But the collapse had altered everything. Every surface felt unfamiliar. Soft flesh gave way beneath his hands, releasing warm fluid that dripped down his arm. Membranes shifted under his weight, threatening to envelop him. He slipped twice, nearly falling into a newly formed pit of liquefied tissue. Panic clawed at his chest. He forced it down. Slowly, painfully, he found a section of membrane that felt firmer than the surrounding walls. It had a certain tension to it, like a ridge. He remembered climbing something similar before blacking out. Crawling on hands and knees, he followed the ridge upward. The membrane pulled against him, sticky and warm, but he pressed on. His vision blurred repeatedly. He blinked hard, desperate to stay focused. The ridge narrowed into a slit, a long vertical indentation that pulsed slightly with each movement of the whale. He reached inside. The opening was tight, but there was space beyond it, a cavity with slightly cooler air. Using what little strength remained, he forced himself into the slit. Membrane scraped against his skin, leaving burning streaks. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed through inch by inch until he finally emerged into the cavity above. The new chamber was much smaller than he remembered. The whale's internal collapse had constricted it, but more light filtered through the outer layers of tissue here. Soft, diluted daylight cast a ghostly glow across the curved walls. He gasped with relief. The air was still foul, but not quite as suffocating. He inhaled greedily, ignoring the burn in his lungs. It took several minutes for his vision to stabilize. When it did, he scanned the chamber for weaknesses in the membrane overhead. If he could tear through, he might reach the surface, or at least the outer hide of the whale. But the membrane was deathly smooth, too smooth. He pressed his palms upward. The membrane yielded, barely, but not enough. He dug his fingers into it. It stretched, but held firm. Frustration surged. He slammed his fists into the surface repeatedly. The membrane wobbled like gelatin under his blows, but did not tear. He pressed his ear to the wall again. Waves, gulls, and voices? He froze. There were voices, faint and muffled, too distant to decipher, but unmistakably human. He strained to listen, pressing his cheek as hard as he could against the membrane. The voices were moving, shifting locations, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. People were near the whale. He opened his mouth to scream, but his voice cracked. He forced air through his throat. A hoarse cry escaped him, barely audible, but a cry nonetheless. He paused, listening. Nothing. Again, he screamed, this time louder, pushing his voice beyond the limits of his raw throat until pain lanced through his chest. Still nothing. The whale's body muffled everything. Layers of blubber and gas-insulated muscle turned his screams into whispers.
overwhelmed. His heart pounded in his ears. Desperation flooded him. He clawed at the membrane, dug his nails in, kicked it, slammed his fists until the skin of his knuckles split. The membrane remained unbroken. The whale shifted again. A groan echoed through its body, deep and resonant. A pocket of gas burst somewhere below him with a low, wet pop, releasing a wave of toxic fumes that crawled up into the chamber. He coughed violently, his vision blurred, the air thickened, becoming almost tangible. He covered his mouth with the fabric of his sleeve, trying to filter the worst of it. He had to escape, now. He scanned the chamber again, searching for any point where the membrane looked thinner. He spotted a faint discoloration, a patch of tissue that appeared more transparent than the rest. He crawled toward it, ignoring the sharp pain in his joints. His fingers probed the spot. It was soft, softer than anywhere else. He dug his fingernails in again. This time, the membrane stretched a little more. He pressed harder. The membrane began to give way. A tiny tear formed, no wider than a grain of rice, but it was progress. He forced his fingers into the tear, stretching it further. The tissue resisted, but the decomposition had weakened it just enough. He pulled with everything he had. The tear widened. A thin stream of cold, fresh air seeped through, brushing against his fingertips like a breath of salvation. He inhaled deeply, almost sobbing at the sensation. Then he made a mistake. He pulled harder, too hard. The membrane ruptured suddenly, splitting several inches. A rush of cold seawater surged into the chamber, slamming into him with unexpected force. He was thrown backward, his head striking the membrane behind him. The chamber lurched, the whale groaned, the entire carcass tilted violently. The tear he had created was now a gaping wound, one that threatened to flood the chamber completely. He scrambled toward the hole, his hand slipping on the wet membrane. As the water poured in, he pushed his face toward the opening, gasping for fresh air. He peered through the tear. What he saw froze him. He was still underwater. The whale had partially sunk. The light he had glimpsed came through several feet of seawater. He could see sunlight, distorted and rippling across the surface, but it was too far to reach from inside the whale. The opening led directly into the water, not to air. He had torn into the whale's exterior, but not above the waterline. Another wave of seawater rushed in, slamming into him and filling the chamber to his chest. He sputtered, gasping. The water was cold, shockingly cold compared to the whale's internal heat. The sudden temperature drop left him shivering uncontrollably. He had minutes, maybe less. He pushed his arm through the tear again, widening it further. Cold water surged in faster. The chamber began to collapse from the pressure. The walls buckled inward. The whale groaned. He tried pushing his shoulders through, but the opening was too small. He pulled back, choking on the foul mixture of seawater and internal fluids now filling the chamber. He tried again, still too small. He realized with horror that his only chance of escape might be to allow the chamber to flood completely, filling the whale's internal cavity until pressure equalized enough for him to pull himself through. But if he mistimed it, he would drown. The chamber filled to his chest, then to his shoulders, then to his chin. The cold bit into him like knives. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. His muscles cramped. He pressed his mouth against the membrane near the tear, inhaling the last pockets of air trapped inside. The chamber filled completely. He held his breath. The membrane overhead collapsed. Water enveloped him. He felt weightless. The pressure around him equalized. The tear expanded as the decomposing flesh sagged outward and tore further. He pushed. His head squeezed through the opening. His shoulders scraped against torn tissue. He pulled with everything he had. Something tore, whether the membrane or his skin, he could not tell. His upper body emerged into cold seawater.
The whale was submerged several feet beneath the surface, its upper back still visible as a massive shadow overhead. His lungs screamed, his body threatened to give up. With one final agonizing pull, he tore the opening wide enough to drag his entire body through. He kicked upward, his limbs heavy and trembling. He reached the surface. He gasped, but instead of air, he inhaled a mixture of seawater and foam. He coughed violently, choking. Then he heard it, a voice, distant, muffled, calling out from somewhere nearby. He forced his eyes open. He saw light, sunlight, bright and blinding, and silhouettes moving along a rocky shoreline just beyond the drifting whale. He tried to shout, but before any sound escaped him, the whale jolted violently. A wave struck him, dragging him downward again. He felt himself slipping beneath the surface. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was a man sprinting toward the water, shouting for others to follow. Then everything went black.
Dark, inevitable, again. And this time, he felt himself sinking, deeper than before, beside a whale that might finally be descending for good. He sank in silence, deeper than before, deeper than he had ever felt himself fall. Cold swallowed him first, a cold unlike the internal heat of the whale, a sharp, biting cold that penetrated the skin and wrapped around his bones like a vice. His arms flailed instinctively, searching for direction, but the water spun him in spirals. The faint sunlight above him flickered, blurred, then disappeared entirely as he slipped beneath the surface. For a moment, he thought the whale was dragging him downward. Its massive shadow loomed beside him, descending with a slow, ominous grace. But then he realized it wasn't the whale pulling him. It was his own body failing. Exhaustion had hollowed him out. His limbs felt heavy, numb. His lungs burned. He was sinking because he could no longer swim. A strange calmness descended over him, as though the sea had wrapped him in a cocoon. The muffled roar of water filled his ears. His senses dulled. Somewhere above him, distant and distorted, he heard shouting, voices splashing, chaos, but they sounded like echoes drifting across a vast canyon. His mind drifted with them. He saw memories, fragments of childhood, his father's voice calling him across the harbor, his mother's hands braiding rope, a lantern swaying on a boat dock, warm evenings spent mending nets beside his grandfather, the smell of rice steaming in a wooden pot. These images flickered like lantern light against a dark tide. Then, another sound, a deep, resonant rumble. The whale's body hit the seafloor. The shockwave sent a plume of sand upward, swirling like smoke in the deep. The shockwave reached him, rolling his body sideways. He collided with something hard, perhaps rock. Pain shot through his ribs. His lungs spasmed. Instinct forced his mouth open, but he held his breath with the last thread of consciousness he possessed. He clawed at the water, kicked weakly, felt his body rising, slowly, far too slowly. His vision narrowed. A pinpoint of light appeared above, growing brighter, closer. Two hands plunging into the water, grasping his arm with desperate strength. Another hand grabbed his shirt. His head broke the surface. Air slammed into his lungs in a violent, ragged gasp. He coughed seawater, choking. Voices erupted around him, shouts in Japanese. He felt himself being pulled toward shore, dragged across uneven rocks.
The cold air stabbed at his skin. His body convulsed as breath returned in agonizing bursts. He lay on his back, coughing, spitting salt water, his chest heaving. The sky above him swirled, shifting between blue and white as clouds drifted overhead. Faces hovered above him, fishermen, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and horror. One man whispered a prayer. Another crossed himself despite not being Christian. A third stared at Hachiro with wide, fearful eyes, as though unsure whether the man before him was human at all. Hachiro tried to speak. Only a faint rasp escaped his lips. He lifted a trembling hand to the whale's carcass. It bobbed in the shallows, a few meters offshore, its once gargantuan form now caving inward as gases escaped through the tear he had created. The fisherman stared at it in stunned silence. One man muttered, "Impossible." Another said, "He came out of that?" A third replied, "No man could survive inside a whale." Hachiro closed his eyes, the world spinning. He would have slipped into unconsciousness if not for the pain. His entire body burned. Chemical burns from decomposition fluids covered his torso, his back, his arms. His skin was blotched with red, swollen where it had come in contact with acidic pockets inside the whale. He felt shredded, inside and out. A fisherman pressed a hand against his forehead, murmuring something. Another shouted for cloth and boiling water. Someone wrapped a blanket around him, its coarse wool scraping against his burns, sending jolts of pain through every nerve. He tried to sit up. His muscles refused him. The world blurred again. The voices around him became hollow. The last thing he heard before slipping into unconsciousness was the crack of splitting flesh. The whale's carcass finally tearing open completely as the tide shifted beneath it. He would not know until much later that the men who found him did not sleep that night. They sat around a small fire on the beach, watching the whale's remains drift in the shallows, whispering among themselves. Some believed they had pulled a ghost from the sea. Others believed an ancient spirit had been angered. One man said he had seen something move inside the whale before Hachiro emerged, something that had vanished when the tear widened. But by morning, the whale carcass was gone. The tide had carried it away during the night, leaving nothing but a trail of oily residue on the waves and the faint odor of decay lingering in the air. When Hachiro awoke, he was inside a small fishing hut. The ceiling was low, made from driftwood beams and bundled straw. Light filtered through a crack in the wall, painting shifting patterns on the floor. His body lay on a thin futon, covered by blankets. He tried to sit up, but pain radiated through his ribs, forcing him to fall back. An old fisherman sitting nearby noticed the movement and smiled with relief. He said softly, "You live." Hachiro's voice was little more than a whisper. "Where?" The man replied, "Suganuma Beach, near Amori. We found you yesterday." Hachiro blinked slowly. The memory returned in fragments. Voices on the shore, the cold, the sight of silhouettes. His body shook. The old man placed a hand on his arm. "You must rest. You were dead when we pulled you out, or near enough." Hachiro swallowed. His throat burned. What happened to the whale? The old man's expression shifted, something between fear and uncertainty. It drifted away during the night. The tide took it. Hachiro closed his eyes. The old man leaned forward. "What were you doing inside it? How did did you survive?" Hachiro's breath hitched. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. When he finally managed to form them, they came out hoarse and broken. It swallowed me." The old fisherman stared at him confused. "Whales do not swallow men." Hachiro shook his head weakly. "No, not alive. I fell. The body was open. It took me inside." The old fisherman sat back, his expression unreadable. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. "Rest. Someone from the nearest village will take you to the doctor. You need more help than we can give." Hachiro drifted in and out of consciousness for the next several hours. He dreamed of darkness, of heat, of suffocating chambers that shifted and groaned. The smell of decay filled his nostrils even in sleep. When he awoke again, the hut was empty. But outside, voices, low, urgent. Hachiro tried to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. He leaned toward the doorway. Through the crack, he saw several fishermen gathered around the fire pit, their faces tense. One man spoke in a hushed tone. "Are you sure it was a whale?" Another nodded. "We saw it. What else could it be?" A third man shook his head slowly. But the tear was too clean, too deliberate. Deliberate how? Like something clawed its way out. Silence followed. Finally, the old fisherman spoke. "It doesn't matter what we think. A man is alive. That is what matters." "But the carcass," another man whispered. "It wasn't there this morning. The tide could not carry something that large without—"
Now he wasn't sure. By the time the village doctor arrived, a stern man with a leather medical bag and deep lines etched into his face, Hachiro was trembling. The doctor examined him carefully, his brow furrowing at the sight of the burns covering his face. "You're lucky to be alive," he muttered. "The chemicals inside a decomposing whale are toxic. You should have died within hours, not days." Hachiro tried to explain. The doctor listened, expression stern. But the more Hachiro described, air pockets, partially digested fish, narrow chambers, the more the doctor's features tightened. Finally, he spoke. "Keep your story quiet." Hachiro blinked. "Why?" The doctor packed away his instruments. "Because no one will believe it." He paused. "And those who do will not react kindly." Hachiro frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor lowered his voice. "Superstition runs deep in these parts. A man emerging from a whale's belly? Some will call it a curse, others a bad omen. You survived something that should be impossible. That alone will frighten people." Hachiro closed his eyes. The doctor's words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. The doctor continued, "I will arrange transport for you to Hakodate. You need a hospital, but until you leave, say nothing. Rest, drink water, stay inside." Hachiro nodded weakly. But rest did not come easily. That night, he lay awake, listening to the sound of the wind rattling the hut walls, the distant crash of waves, and the faint, uneasy murmur of the fishermen outside. Near midnight, he drifted into a shallow sleep. Then, something moved outside the hut. A soft splash, a low scrape against rock. He opened his eyes, heart pounding. Another sound, a heavy, wet dragging. He forced himself to sit up despite the pain. He held his breath. Another dragging sound. Closer. Closer. The shadow of something passed by the doorway. Large, indistinct. His breath hitched. The whisper of movement ceased. Silence. Then, a sound he recognized with chilling clarity. A deep, resonant groan, like a whale's body shifting under pressure. Except this time, it came from just outside the hut. Hachiro froze. The groan deepened. Something massive brushed against the hut wall, making the wooden beams creak. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. And in that moment, he realized something terrible. The whale carcass had not drifted away that morning. Something had taken it, and now, whatever it was, had come back. The walls of the hut shuddered softly, as though something enormous had pressed its weight against the timber. Dust drifted from the rafters, settling over Hachiro's blankets. He dared not breathe. Every muscle in his body locked into place, frozen by a fear so primal it felt older than memory itself. Another groan, a low, guttural rumble, vibrated through the floorboards. This time it was closer to a moan, thick and wet, almost like an exhalation. Hachiro clamped a hand over his mouth, biting down on the inside of his cheek to keep from making a sound. He strained to listen. The night outside had fallen into an uneasy stillness. No gulls, no waves against the rocks, not even the rustle of grass in the wind. Only the faint scrape of something dragging itself along the beach. The sound stopped directly outside the hut. Silence followed. A silence so heavy it felt mandatory, as though the entire world held its breath alongside him. He counted the seconds in his mind. 1, 2, 3. A soft patter broke the quiet. Not footsteps, no. Too irregular for that. More like droplets of thick fluid striking the sand. Viscous, heavy, each sound spaced unevenly, as though dripping from something layered and torn. His mind flashed back to the whale's interior, fluids trickling down membranes, dripping from ruptured flesh. The smell, the sound. He felt bile rise in his throat. Outside, something let out a sound that did not belong to any human throat. A rasping gurgle, as though some creature attempted to draw breath through waterlogged lungs. Hachiro pressed his back against the far wall of the hut, trembling violently. Pain radiated through his burned skin, but he barely felt it. All he could think of was the suffocating darkness inside the whale, the way certain chambers had heaved and pulsed, the sensation of something shifting behind the walls. He assumed it was decomposition. Now, an older instinct whispered otherwise. He pushed the thought away, but it slithered back, persistent. Something was moving inside the whale, and that something had not drowned. A faint shadow passed across the thin doorway. A heavy shape blocked the moonlight, casting the interior into total darkness. Hachiro's vision swam. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The shadow lingered for several seconds. Too still, too deliberate. It was listening. Hachiro forced himself not to move, not to shiver, not to breathe any louder than the whisper of wind. The shadow shifted again, its bulk sliding past the doorway. Wooden beams groaned as weight brushed against them, bending slightly inward. He felt the floor vibrate beneath him, once, then again, as though something massive was dragging itself along the hut's exterior. The dragging sound grew fainter, farther. Then it stopped entirely.
And for a long while, nothing moved. Hachiro waited, muscles locked, barely daring to blink. His heart pounded so loudly, he was certain it would give him away. Minutes passed. Eventually, a distant splash echoed across the shoreline. Then another, several in quick succession. Whatever creature had approached the hut was moving back toward the water. He heard the wet dragging once more, the grinding of something massive and heavy across the sand. The waves grew restless again, breaking softly against the rocks. The night sounds returned in hesitant fragments. The cry of a lone gull far offshore, the whisper of wind across the dunes. Then a final sound reached him, a deep groan, distant yet unmistakable. A sound he had heard many times inside the whale. A sound he would never forget. Then it faded. Gone. Only then did he allow himself to breathe again. His lungs burned with relief and fear. The sweat plastered his clothing to his skin. His body trembled uncontrollably. He wanted to call out to the fisherman, but his voice was gone, swallowed by terror and dehydration. He remained awake through the night, clutching his blankets like a shield. His mind replayed what he had heard, analyzing, comparing, trying to rationalize. But nothing matched. Not a person, not a known animal, nothing natural. Dawn arrived slowly. The morning light spilled across the floor in thin, trembling beams. Hachiro forced himself into a sitting position, groaning with pain as his burned skin stretched. The village doctor returned at sunrise. He entered the hut carrying fresh bandages and water. The moment he saw Hachiro's face, his expression twisted. What happened? Hachiro opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The doctor approached quickly, examining him. Your pulse is racing. Your body's freezing. What frightened you? Hachiro lifted a shaking hand and pointed toward the door. The doctor stiffened. He walked to the entrance and looked outside. After a moment, he stepped out into the morning light. Hachiro listened, barely breathing. The doctor murmured something to himself. Then his voice rose in alarm. Hachiro, he called. Come look. He staggered to the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. What he saw made his heart freeze. Grooves carved through the sand, long, heavy furrows, stretching from the water's edge to the very wall of the hut. The grooves were uneven, marked by crushing weight. Pools of stagnant fluid dotted the path, fluids identical to those that had soaked his skin inside the whale. Silvery scraps of flesh clung to the rocks, pieces of torn tissue, shreds of blubber. And one other thing. A ragged chunk of baleen, broken and split, lay partially buried in the sand. The doctor knelt beside it, touching it with 2 fingers. This is from a whale, he whispered. Hachiro's legs weakened. The doctor stood slowly, turning to him. You said the carcass drifted away, but these marks, they show something dragged it. Not the tide, something else. Hachiro's voice finally returned, a broken whisper. It came here last night. The doctor's breath caught. Something came from the whale? Hachiro closed his eyes and nodded. The doctor exhaled shakily. You need to leave this place immediately. By mid-morning, arrangements had been made. A fisherman offered to escort him to Aomori City, where he could board a train to Hokkaido. The doctor insisted on accompanying him at least as far as the port. But as they prepared to leave, a young fisherman sprinted toward them, gasping for breath. You need to come to the cove, he said, eyes wide. All of you, now. The doctor stiffened. What happened? The young man swallowed hard. There's something in the water. They followed him down the narrow path toward the cove. As they approached, several more villagers were gathered on the rocks, pointing at the water. Their faces were pale. At first, Hachiro saw nothing unusual, just waves lapping against the rocks and gulls circling overhead. Then one of the gulls landed on something floating in the surf. Not something, part of something. The whale's carcass, or what remained of it. The massive fin whale, once nearly 20 meters long, had been reduced to scattered fragments. Bones jutted from the water at odd angles, stripped clean in places. Long strips of blubber floated like pale ribbons, drifting in the tide. The skull had been cracked open, its interior hollowed out. It broke apart during the night, someone whispered. No, another voice said, trembling. Something tore it apart. The doctor's jaw tightened. Whales do not decompose like this. Not overnight. Hachiro stared at the remains, a cold dread filling his chest. He recognized certain fragments, chambers he had crawled through, membranes he had torn, ligaments he had pressed against while searching for escape. But they were torn open now, not collapsed, pulled apart. A fisherman pulled a harpoon from his boat. We need to kill it, he said, shakily. Kill what? Another man asked. The fisherman pointed toward the cove. Whatever was in there, whatever came on shore. Hachiro's voice shook. It came to the hut last night. It was listening.
All eyes turned toward him. The doctor whispered, "We're leaving, now." The fishermen began to disperse, retrieving children, gathering tools, calling to their families. Some whispered prayers, others cursed the sea. Hachiro turned to follow the doctor. Then the sea behind them erupted. A massive shadow surged upward from the water in a burst of foam and spray. Screams tore through the air. Villagers stumbled backward, falling onto the rocks in panic. And Hachiro saw it, for the first and only time, as it rose from the depths where the whale had died. A glistening shape, a twisted form, dripping with the whale's fluids. Something that should not exist. Something that had lived inside the whale. Something that had crawled inside the chambers where he had lain. Something that had followed the scent of him across the sand. And now, it had found him. The creature rose slowly, as though reluctant to reveal itself to the daylight. At first, it was only a mass of darkness, shapeless, heavy, dripping in thick ropes of tissue from the whale's interior. Gulls shrieked and scattered into the sky, startled by the eruption of water. Villagers stumbled backward across the rocks, some falling to their knees, others scrambling toward the huts with frantic shouts. The thing's outline sharpened as it heaved itself higher. Its surface was mottled and slick, sheened with a sickly mixture of seawater, oil, and decomposed flesh. Strips of blubber clung to its frame like discarded cloth. For a heartbeat, no one dared move, not even the creature. Then a single appendage lifted. An arm, though calling it that felt generous. It bent at two unnatural joints, each angle jutting forward like a broken limb reset incorrectly. Along its underside were ridges resembling cartilage or bone. yet it flexed with a disturbing fluidity, neither fully skeletal nor muscular. Hachiro's breath froze in his throat. That jointed shape, he had seen it before. Inside the whale, pressing against a membrane behind him, scraping, moving, repositioning itself. He had told himself it was the whale settling, just another chamber collapsing, another trick of decomposition. He had been wrong. The creature's arm slapped down onto a rock with a wet, nauseating thud. Algae and sand splattered outward. Its other limbs, there were 3, no 4, dragged behind it, tangled in remnants of the whale's internal viscera. A fisherman whispered, "Kami-sama, save us!" The monster's head emerged next. It was elongated, smooth in some places, wrinkled in others, as though parts of its surface were newly formed and others centuries old. No eyes were visible, not in the way humans understand eyes, but on each side of its head were 2 depressions pulsing faintly like the gills of a deep-sea creature forced into shallower water. Its mouth, or what passed for one, was a slit running diagonally across its lower face, quivering with each heaving breath. A viscous substance oozed from its edges, trailing into the water like threads of ink. For several long seconds, the creature simply hung there, suspended halfway between sea and land. Its limbs tensed, its body expanded and contracted. It was studying them, not with eyes, but with something else, a kind of sensing that felt biological, ancient, and deeply wrong. A fisherman behind Hachiro shouted, panicked, "Get back! Get back!" Another man raised a harpoon, his hands shaking violently. The old doctor gripped Hachiro's arm. "Do not move." But the creature did. Its head snapped in their direction, its limbs flexed, and with a grotesque mixture of dragging and crawling, it began to move toward shore. The villagers scattered. Some ran inland, shouting warnings. Others scrambled for weapons, oars, hooks, anything with a point. Children were pulled behind huts. Women called out names, searching for their husbands and sons. The creature advanced, slowly, dragging the remains of the whale along with it. Shreds of blubber, tangled baleen, half-dissolved tissue. Each movement emitted a sound that turned the stomach, a wet grinding, like sinews being pulled through tight spaces. Hachiro stumbled backward, fear surging through every nerve. But something rooted him in place. Not bravery, recognition. Inside the whale, he had felt something move in the dark, something that had tried to shift deeper as he crawled upward, something that had groaned when the whale's membranes pressed against it. He had thought he was alone. He had not been. The creature's head lifted. For a moment, the slit along its face widened, revealing rows of soft, transient structures that undulated like the inner mouth of a squid. They glistened with slime. They were not teeth. Not exactly. More like appendages, for sensing, tasting, absorbing. The harpooner finally overcame his terror and hurled his weapon. The harpoon whistled through the air and struck the creature's upper side. The spear embedded itself halfway, but nothing happened. No cry, no flinch, no sign of pain. The harpoon simply hung there, wobbling slightly with the thing's breathing. The creature turned its head toward the harpooner. The man froze in mid-step, his expression breaking into pure horror. He backpedaled so fast he tripped over his own feet, falling onto the rocks. He scrambled backward on hands and heels, eyes wide open with disbelief. The creature moved toward him. Not fast, not slow, but with a deliberate, dreadful certainty. Hachiro's pulse thundered in his ears. The cold morning air pressed against his burns, but he didn't feel it anymore. His world narrowed to the creature's movements and the rising sense that the sea had delivered something into our world that never belonged on land. The doctor whispered beside him, "Do you know what it is?" Hachiro swallowed hard. His voice trembled. It was inside the whale. The doctor stared at him in disbelief. Inside? How? Hachiro shook his head slowly. I heard it, felt it,
When I crawled through the chambers, it tried to move deeper, away from me. The doctor's eyes widened. "You don't mean," Hachiro whispered. "Something survived inside that whale, long before I fell in."
The creature was crawling fully onto the rocks now, its limbs spreading outward. Each movement revealed more of its body. Long, segmented structures hidden beneath layers of decomposing tissue. Certain segments twitched independently, as though testing the air. A fisherman shouted from somewhere inland, "It's coming farther ashore!" And another man contradicted him, "No, look! It's not chasing the harpooner!" He was right. The creature had shifted direction. Its head turned sharply toward Hachiro. A trembling chill gripped him. It had recognized him. Not by sight. Hachiro knew that much. The creature had no visible eyes. It must have recognized his scent, his chemical signature, the traces of decomposition fluid that still clung to his skin. The same fluids from inside the whale. The creature dragged itself toward him with renewed purpose, its limbs pulling its bulk and jerking elastic motions that defied human anatomy. Strands of whale flesh snapped behind it like rotten sinews. Villagers screamed and scattered, clearing a path without meaning to, leaving Hachiro exposed in the open. "Hachiro, move!" the doctor shouted, gripping his arm. But his legs refused to respond. Terror rooted him in place. His mind flashed back to the suffocating darkness inside the whale, the oppressive heat, the wet membrane shifting around him, and the faint rhythmic pressure that had pushed against his side. Something alive in the chambers, trapped alongside him. The creature's slit mouth quivered as it approached, filaments extending outward, tasting the air. Its lips hauled it across the shoreline with sickening determination. The doctor yanked Hachiro's arm harder. "Run!" Hachiro stumbled backward, his legs trembling. The pain shot through his ribs, making him gasp. The doctor supported him, dragging him away from the advancing creature. But the creature accelerated. Its limbs began moving in overlapping motions. The carcass behind it was no longer hindering it. It was shedding pieces of the whale's flesh as it moved, leaving a trail of steaming brine along the rocks. Villagers screamed. One man hurled a rock at the creature's head. It struck the side of the beast with a dull thud. The creature paused, tilting its head, almost curious. Then its mouth slit widened. It emitted a sound so low, so resonant, that the rocks beneath Hachiro's feet vibrated. Children burst into tears. Women clamped their hands over their ears. Even the gulls fled. The doctor whispered, "Dear God." "Hachiro!" a voice shouted from behind. Two fishermen sprinted toward them, carrying a long net between them. They didn't hesitate. With a practiced motion, born from years of hauling massive catches, they cast the net toward the creature. The weighted edge flew through the air and landed cleanly over it. The lead fisherman shouted, "Pull!" 6 villagers seized the ropes, bracing themselves. They pulled with their full weight, anchoring the net around the creature. The net constricted, tightening across its limbs and torso. For a split second, hope flickered. Then, the creature moved. Not away from the net, through it. The net did not snap. It simply unraveled. Fibers dissolved as the creature pushed against it, as if something acidic or enzymatic was eating through the rope. Within seconds, the net fell apart in a shower of frayed strands. The fishermen staggered back, dropping the useless ropes, eyes wide with horror. "Hachiro," felt the doctor's hands tighten on his arm. "We can't stay here." He nodded weakly, his voice nearly gone. "Help me move." The doctor hauled Hachiro toward the inland path leading to the forest. The fishermen gathered behind them, shouting warnings, waving for villagers to flee. The creature shifted again and began crawling after Hachiro. Not toward the others, not toward the town, only toward him. The doctor realized it too.
It wants you. Hachiro stumbled, nearly falling. His legs were shaking so violently he could barely stay upright. The doctor wrapped an arm around his torso. Move! Move! The creature accelerated, dragging itself across the rocks with terrifying strength. Its limbs slapped against the stone, leaving streaks of steaming fluid. Villagers tried to intervene, throwing hooks, poles, stones, anything they could find. But the creature ignored them entirely, its movements unbroken, relentless. It wanted the man who had taken his space inside the whale, the man who had crawled through the chambers it once occupied, the man who had survived where it expected to be alone. Hachiro. The doctor's voice cracked. We're not fast enough. But before he could finish, a sound tore through the cove. A deafening blast. A cloud of smoke erupted near the water's edge. Someone had fired a gun. The creature recoiled, not in pain, but in reaction. Its limbs splayed outward, anchoring itself against the rocks. The villagers turned. An elderly man, white-haired, hunched and shaking, stood on the far side of the cove, clutching a rusted hunting rifle. His voice rose above the chaos, raw and furious. Back to the sea with you! He fired again. The second bullet struck the upper segment of the creature. A spray of dark fluid erupted from the impact point, thick, almost tar-like. The creature howled. The entire shoreline shook. For the first time, it withdrew, its limbs curling inward as though protecting the wounded segment. The old man shouted again, firing a third time. The bullet hit lower this time, embedding deep. The creature recoiled further, withdrawing toward the water. Hachiro gasped in disbelief. The doctor whispered, "It can be hurt!" But as he said it, something changed.
The creature straightened, its limbs tensed. The wounds began to clot, not bleeding but sealing, regenerating. The old man stared in horror. Impossible. The creature turned toward him, and for the first time, it stood upright. Not fully, not like a human, but enough to reveal its true height. Nearly 3 meters tall. Its limbs unfolded like massive, dripping wings. Its torso expanded, ridged with cartilage. The whale's remains dripped from its jaw-like slit. Hachiro's breath caught. The doctor whispered, "Oh God, oh God." The creature leaned forward and began moving again, faster, stronger. The old fisherman tried to reload, but his trembling hands failed him. The creature lunged, and the cove erupted into screams. The old fisherman had barely time to gasp. The creature's limbs, slick with brine and decomposed tissue, snapped forward with unnatural speed. It moved not like an animal, nor like anything that belonged on land, but with a disturbing elasticity, each joint bending, flexing, and recoiling with whip-like precision. The villagers screamed. Some turned and fled. Others froze where they stood, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. The creature's towering silhouette loomed over the old man, its ridged limbs unfolding like dark petals around him. For a single heartbeat, everything fell silent, so quiet that even the waves seemed to retreat. Then the creature struck. Not with claws, not with teeth, but with the sheer force of its weight. It brought its full mass down upon the rocks, sending shards of stone flying outward. The old fisherman threw himself sideways, narrowly avoiding the impact by inches. The ground where he had stood moments before cracked, leaving a crater of pulverized stone. The rifle tumbled from his hands, clattering down the slope toward the water. "Urgent! Hachiro, run!" the doctor shouted, gripping him with renewed urgency. He stumbled backward, his burned legs trembling under him. Pain radiated through his ribs with each breath, but fear pushed him onward. The doctor dragged him toward the narrow path leading into the forest beyond the village. Behind them,
chaos erupted. The creature recoiled from the shattered rocks, shaking loose the fragments embedded in its limbs. Its slit-like mouth quivered, releasing a low hiss, a sound so deep and resonant it seemed to vibrate inside the skull. Filaments along its jaw unfurled, tasting the air, seeking direction, seeking him. Hachiro felt its attention like a physical weight pressing against his skin. A cold, instinctive understanding washed over him. It would not stop. It could not stop. Something inside it, some ancient impulse, some biological mandate, demanded that it find him. The doctor shouted to the villagers, "Scatter! It only wants him! Get to safety!" But fear had already stolen their ability to think. People fled in every direction, toward the hills, into the forest, across the rocky beach. Children cried, dogs barked frantically. The cove, once peaceful, had transformed into a scene of pure panic. The creature moved again, its limbs pressing against the rocks with sickening suction-like sounds. It began dragging itself inland, leaving a thick trail of brine and decomposed flesh in its wake. Every movement shook the ground. The old fisherman scrambled backward, his breathing ragged. His eyes were wide with a terror that stripped decades from his weathered face. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out, dropping him to the ground once more. The creature turned toward him again, its torso twisting unnaturally. Then another gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet struck the creature's upper segment, tearing through a thin section of its hide. A burst of dark fluid splattered across the rocks. The creature flinched, its first sign of genuine pain. Two villagers stood on a ridge above the cove, each holding an old hunting rifle. Their hands shook violently, but they fired again. The second shot tore through one of the creature's limbs. The limb folded inward, dragging uselessly behind the beast. The creature emitted a sound unlike anything heard before, a deep, gurgling moan that sent a chill through every witness. But instead of retreating, it surged forward. The doctor's grip tightened on Hachiro as he hauled him up the path. "Move, Hachiro, move!" Hachiro's legs barely obeyed. Each step was agony, but adrenaline forced him onward. The path twisted upward, leading into a thick grove of cedar trees. The forest swallowed him quickly, dampening the chaos behind him. But the creature did not stop at the cove. It hunted. It plunged forward with startling speed, ignoring the gunfire. Its limbs scraped against rocks, pulling its body up the slope after it. Its movements grew more frantic, more erratic. It was not simply pursuing, it was hunting. "Faster!" the doctor gasped. "It's coming!" They reached a narrow clearing halfway up the hill. The doctor dragged him behind a cluster of cedar trunks, pressing him against the bark. "Stay here, don't make a sound." Hachiro shook his head violently. "No, don't leave!" But the doctor gripped his shoulders, his eyes fierce. "If it sees both of us, we both die. If it sees only me, maybe you live." Before Hachiro could protest, the doctor stepped into the clearing, waving his arms to draw attention. "Over here!" he shouted, his voice cracked with fear. "Here!" Hachiro's heart clenched. The doctor was old, tired, no match for something like this. But sacrifice had always been woven into the lives of fishermen. Men who lived by the sea understood danger and courage in equal measure. The creature reached the edge of the woods. Branches snapped beneath its weight, leaves shook free. Shadows lurched as its massive body pressed between the trees. It paused in the entrance to the forest, its limbs adjusting, testing new terrain. Then it surged toward the doctor. Doctor staggered backward, dodging behind a cluster of bushes. The creature's limbs smashed through the foliage, sending branches flying. The doctor dove behind a fallen log, clutching at the dirt. Hachiro pressed a trembling hand to his mouth to stifle a cry. The creature struck again.
The log splintered under the force. The doctor scrambled away, but the creature's reach was too great. One of its limbs arced over the log and crashed down where he had been seconds before. Helpless, Hachiro couldn't look away. His breath shook violently. His burns pulsed with sharp electric pain. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused. The doctor tripped, falling onto his back. He stared up at the towering silhouette, his face pale, his breath ragged. The creature loomed over him.
Its limbs positioned like pillars around him. Its slit mouth quivered, releasing a deep, rolling groan. The doctor shut his eyes and whispered a single word. Run. A sound tore through the forest, louder than before. A gunshot? No, something else. The creature recoiled. Its limbs snapped backward, twisting violently. It thrashed once, twice. Then its body slammed sideways into a cedar trunk, splitting the bark. Hachiro stared, confused. What had struck it? Then he heard shouting, angry, desperate shouting from farther down the path. Villagers, not with rifles, with harpoons. A group of 6 men charged uphill, yelling as they thrust long whaling spears into the creature's flank. The spears pierced deep into its twisted segments, driving it sideways. The creature howled, a sound so piercing it rattled the cedar branches. It lashed out in every direction, splintering trees and sending villagers tumbling backward. But the spears held. Villagers advanced again. More harpoons flew through the air, embedding into the creature's torso. Ropes attached to the harpoons stretched tight as men planted their feet, using the leverage of the hill to pull. The creature thrashed wildly. Its limbs struck a tree, cracking it near the base. A fisherman was swept off his feet by a flailing appendage and slammed into a trunk with a sickening crunch. Another man was dragged several meters before the rope snapped, sending him tumbling down the slope. Still, the villagers did not retreat. They pressed forward with the determination of men defending their home, their families, their very existence. Hachiro watched, numb and trembling. This wasn't bravery. This was desperation. The creature reared back, its body convulsing. One of its limbs snapped a rope, sending 2 fishermen flying. Another harpoon tore free, spraying dark fluid across the trees. The creature's strength was immense. Even injured, even outnumbered, it resisted with terrifying power. But numbers and terrain were on the villager side. They pulled, bracing themselves against the hillside. The creature's movement slowed. One more harpoon flew, then another, then another. Dark fluid gushed from the creature's wounds. Finally, with a sound like wet stone giving way, the creature's body collapsed sideways. It crashed into the forest floor, shaking the ground. Its limbs twitched, once, twice, then stilled. Villagers circled it, breathing hard, their bodies trembling with adrenaline and fear. Some held to trees for balance, others collapsed to their knees. The doctor staggered to his feet, still alive, though pale and shaking. He stared at the creature's crumpled form, unable to believe what he was seeing. Hachiro emerged slowly from behind the cedar trunks, his legs weak. The creature lay motionless, its limbs splayed like branches from a fallen, unnatural tree. The remains of the whale it had inhabited clung to its hide, dripping in thick strands. Its slit mouth hung open, its filaments sagged. It appeared dead. But the villagers did not approach. No one dared. They watched it for several long minutes, waiting, expecting movement, expecting a sudden resurgence, but none came. The doctor exhaled shakily.
Is it over? No one answered. Hachiro took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Then another. The doctor reached to stop him, but Hachiro gently pushed his hand aside. He needed to see it, needed to face it, needed to understand what had shared the darkness with him for so many days. He reached the creature's head. A drip of brine fell from its jaw, another from its limb. Its body lay still. Its breathing, if it ever breathed, had ceased. Hachiro stared at its strange alien anatomy, the ridges along its torso, the ambiguous shape of its face, the remnants of the whale it had inhabited, fused to its skin like a second hide. For a long moment, he felt neither fear nor relief, only a profound sinking sorrow. He whispered, barely audible, "You survived too, didn't you?" Something stirred beneath the creature's jaw. A faint movement, a subtle flex, a twitch. Hachiro's breath caught. He leaned closer, and the slit mouth slowly unfolded. Not quickly, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate motion, as though something inside was waking.
A tendril-like filament emerged, quivering in the air. The villagers gasped. Someone shouted, "It's alive!" Hachiro stumbled backward, falling onto the dirt. The creature's body pulsed, just once, but once was enough. The villagers raised their harpoons again. The doctor grabbed Hachiro, pulling him away. And as the creature's limbs began to tense, to rise, to revive, the forest trembled with the weight of something that had not yet finished dying. The moment the creature's limbs twitched, a collective terror swept through the forest. The villagers staggered backward, some shouting warnings, others gripping their harpoons so tightly their knuckles turned white. Even the bravest among them could not hide the fear in their eyes. The thing on the forest floor, broken, bloodied, pinned to the earth by ropes and spears, had no right to move again. But it did. The creature's slit mouth widened, trembling with a slow, deliberate pulse. A thick ribbon of dark fluid dripped from its lower jaw, steaming as it struck the leaves. The filaments lining its mouth unfurled like the tendrils of a deep ocean jelly, quivering as though tasting the air. Hachiro's heart clenched painfully in his chest. He felt the doctor's grip tighten on his arm. "Hachiro, back," the doctor whispered. "Back." A fisherman near the creature raised his harpoon, voice shaking. "If it rises again, we end it now." The creature's body heaved gently, as though taking a breath. One of its limbs flexed, the joints bending inward with sickening fluidity. For a moment, it seemed ready to spring upright, to repeat the carnage at the cove. But then something changed. The limbs sagged, the tendrils drooped, and a deep shudder rippled through the creature's entire form. Not a shiver of awakening, a tremor of failure. The villagers froze. All watched, silent, unmoving, as the creature convulsed one final time. Its body arched reflexively, limbs clawing at the air, scraping deep grooves into the soil. A bubbling groan welled from the slit along its jaw, lower and more ragged than before. Then its form slackened. The tendrils fell limp. The ridged limbs collapsed beneath its weight, and the creature exhaled a sound that was unmistakably final. A long, wet rattle that echoed through the forest like the last breath of something ancient. Its movement ceased entirely. This time,
It did not revive. For a full minute, no one in the clearing dared move. The only sound was the wind stirring the cedars overhead. Finally, the doctor stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, keeping Hashiro behind him. The villagers watched in tense silence. The doctor approached the creature's head, stopping barely a meter away. He leaned forward, listening, observing, studying every inch of the quivering flesh. Hachiro held his breath, terrified that the creature might lurch upward, snatch the doctor, or explode into motion once more. But it didn't. The doctor straightened and turned to the others. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's dead." The collective breath released by the villagers was nearly a sigh of collapse. Some fell to their knees. Others crossed themselves or whispered prayers to whatever gods watched over their village. The tension that had been coiled in their bodies since dawn seemed to drain all at once. But for Hachiro Tanaka, the relief did not come. He stared at the creature's broken body, at the twisted limbs and the glistening hide still fused with remnants of the whale. A deep unease settled in his chest, heavier than fear. What lay before him was not simply a monster slain by desperate villagers. It was a thing that did not belong anywhere he understood. Something born or trapped inside a whale. Something that had shared the darkness with him. Something that had followed him across the sand. Hachiro sank to his knees, his strength finally giving way. The doctor rushed to his side. "Hachiro, easy, easy, you're safe now." But he wasn't sure he believed that. Not entirely.
Heaved. The creature dropped, its body tumbling through the air in a twisted spiral before striking the water with a thunderous splash. For a moment it floated, grotesque, limp, drifting like a mass of kelp. Then the sea began to take it. Dark water pooled around the corpse. Waves tugged at its limbs. Slowly, steadily, it sank. The filaments along its mouth, now lifeless, trailed behind it like shredded ribbons. Hachiro watched as it disappeared into the depths. First the limbs, then the torso, then the head. Finally, the last faint outline sank beneath the surface. Gone. The villagers stood in silence long after the creature vanished. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the gulls seemed to avoid the area, circling in wide arcs far above the cliffs. Only when the final ripple faded did the doctor place a hand on Hachiro's shoulder. "It's over," he said again, quietly. "Truly over." Hachiro nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon. He knew the sea never truly gave up its secrets. Nor did it ever forget them. Days later, after a harrowing boat journey and a painful ride by train, Hachiro arrived back in Hakodate. He was admitted to a small hospital run by a stern but compassionate physician who had seen many strange injuries from fishermen over the years. But nothing like this. Hachiro's burns required weeks of treatment. His lungs had been damaged by the gases inside the whale, leaving him breathless for months. His sleep was plagued by nightmares, slow, suffocating dreams of chambers collapsing around him, of limbs scraping against membranes in the dark. The doctors asked questions. He told them nothing. He claimed he had drifted at sea, surviving by chance until he washed ashore. It was a story that made sense, far more sense than the truth. Whenever the doctor stepped out,
Hachiro would stare out the window at the dark ocean beyond the harbor. It seemed peaceful from a distance, but he knew better. About a month after his rescue, a quiet visitor arrived at his bedside, a fisherman from Suganama village. He carried a small wooden charm carved into the shape of a whale. "A gift," the man said. "The elders wanted you to have it." Hachiro accepted it with trembling hands. The fisherman sat beside him, lowering his voice. "The elders say, in the old stories, things sometimes shelter inside the gray whales, things from the deep. Sometimes they die with the whale. Sometimes they come ashore." Hachiro swallowed, his throat tight. "Do they ever come back?" The man hesitated, then answered softly, "Not once they return to the sea. The deep claims what it's his own." Hachiro nodded slowly. The fisherman stood. Before leaving, he added, "Do not tell your story to others. They will not believe you. And if they did, they would fear you." Hachiro looked down at the small whale charm. "I understand." The man bowed and left, and that was the last time Hachiro ever saw anyone from the village again. He recovered slowly, but he never returned to whaling. The sea no longer felt like something he could trust. Instead, he worked on small coastal boats, repairing nets, mending hulls, teaching younger men how to read currents and storms. He married, had 2 children, and rarely spoke of the past. On rare winter nights, when the wind howled in from the north and the waves crashed against the harbor walls, he would sit alone, holding the wooden charm, remembering the darkness inside the whale, remembering the thing that had shared that darkness with him. He never saw it again. But sometimes, late at night, he would walk along the shore and look out into the black water, and he would wonder if somewhere, far beneath the surface, deeper than any net could reach, something still moved. Something that had lived inside a whale. Something that had crawled across the sand. Something that almost followed him home. And on those nights, listening to the waves, he felt very small, very human, and very aware that the sea keeps its own secrets, not out of malice, but because most people simply cannot bear to know what waits in the dark. Hachiro Tanaka lived to old age. When he died, his children found the worn whale charm in the drawer beside his bed. They kept it, believing it was a good luck token from his father's fishing days. They never knew the truth. No one did, except for the few villagers of Suganama, and even their memories faded with time. The sea remembers, though. It always does. And somewhere along the northern coast, where cold currents twist into shadows and the tides bring strange things ashore, fishermen still whisper about the day a creature came crawling out of a whale's remains, searching for the man who had taken his place. Whether that creature was the last of its kind, or simply one of many hidden in the deep, no one can say. But one truth remains certain. Whatever followed Hachiro Tanaka from the belly of that dead whale, the sea reclaimed it, and the world above never learned how close something ancient had come to stepping onto land. The waves washed the shore clean, the rocks dried under the sun, and life went on. But beneath the surface, in the depths where light died,